Are you tired of your valuable ideas and suggestions getting lost in the shuffle? Well, that is why I'm introducing Direct Suggest, the revolutionary digital suggestion box that puts your voice front and center. With Direct Suggest, you have the power to make a difference in your organization. Direct Suggest provides value to organizations in various industries worldwide, including notable brands like Comcast, TD Bank, and Nokia. And here's the best part. Direct Suggest only costs 50 cents per employee per month, making it an affordable solution for businesses of all sizes. Plus, they have an incredibly high ROI and savings potential with an average 33 times return on investment. The implementation process is also a breeze. Once committed, setting up Direct Suggest from start to finish can be completed in as quickly as a week or less. Don't let your ideas or your team's ideas go unnoticed. Visit directsuggest.com today and start by making a difference with Direct Suggest. Use the promo code HUMANHR for your extended 60-day free trial. Again, visit directsuggest.com to learn more, and remember to use promo code HUMANHR for an extended free trial. Direct Suggest, where your voice matters. Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Tracy Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're listening to or watching this episode. This week, we are going to talk all about how to create a thriving and productive culture for employees, which we can never talk about enough. But I have a really interesting guest on with me this week, Dr. Baktari, who is the CEO of eNational Testing, E7 Health, and U.S. Drug Test Centers. Jonathan BaktariMD brings over 20 years of clinical, administrative, and entrepreneurial experience. He's been a triple board-certified physician specializing in internal medicine, pulmonary, and critical care medicine. Dr. Baktari is a preeminent national business thought leader interviewed in the Washington Post, USA Today, Forbes, Barron, and many other national publications. He's also an opinion writer for The Hill and the Toronto Star. He's the host of a highly rated podcast, BaktariMD, as well as a guest on over 50 podcasts, and I guess now this makes 51 or more. Dr. Baktari was formerly the medical director of the Valley Health System's Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield and Culinary Health Fund. He also served as a clinical faculty for several medical schools, including the University of Nevada and Touro University. So welcome, Dr. Baktari. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, what an honor. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so glad that you've decided to join this podcast, that now, you're over 50 podcasts as a guest, and I'm glad to be 51 or more. But this topic of how to create a thriving, productive culture for employees is an interesting one, regardless of which lens we take, right? But I'm super interested, because of your medical background, how this became something that you are interested in and have become interested in. And if you could walk us through where this interest and passion has come from.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because most people kind of think when you kind of change and pivot like that it was sort of like an epiphany, or you woke up one morning and something banged you on the head and you said, oh, I want to do this. But it was really very gradual, one door opening another door, as I became a professor in medical schools and had administrative positions in the hospital and in the medical field. And it was always one door opening it into another. So it was very gradual. It was almost like watching grass grow. I mean, it's just, you didn't realize it had happened till it happened, because you're always thinking, okay, well, yeah, that sounds interesting. Let me take that administrative position. So I wound up taking positions at the hospital. I wound up, working for the hospital. I wound up working for insurance companies, and it seems just one opportunity created another. And so it's much more gradual than people think. And then eventually evolving into, starting our own thing and developing our own thing, our own company, our own culture, and then learning, what you have to do to make a thriving culture and do a win-win where everybody wants to be a part of it.
Right. It's interesting. It reminds me of the one of the phrases that you had used when we first chatted a few months ago. which was
Mm-hmm.
people can have multiple acts in their lives. And I wrote that down because I thought it was such an interesting way to put that whole idea, right? That you can, you go to medical school and you invest 10 plus years of your life into these
Mm-hmm.
specialties and developing this career. And then you can identify a passion that takes on some of those, a lot of those takeaways and learnings, but then allows you
Mm-hmm.
to step into another quote unquote act of your life. So I wanted to share that because I think the listeners will resonate a lot with that idea.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because a lot of times people who listen to my podcast comment and say, the topics you cover are covered by other people, but you have a different spin on it. And I really owe that to having this sort of non-traditional background. So, for example, in
Mm-hmm.
our podcast, the second year, we talk about Crash CEO School, where how you become a great leader and stuff like that. And we cover topics that there's probably hundreds of YouTube videos on the same topic, top 10 skills of a CEO or a leader, how to build culture. But we're not serving up the same information that you would normally see. And part of that, I think, goes to what you're saying, which is having that background in medicine and working your way up as an intern to a resident to a fellow to an attending, and understanding the process of doing that, and learning to take direction and learning to understand something before you do it. All of these things allow, so hopefully, for us to look at problems in a non-traditional way. So I think in a way all that background was a blessing.
Absolutely. I mean, I would imagine that anyone going through 10 or more years of education for one particular subject or, subject matter to become an expert, would have uh, something to take away from that. Obviously, that goes without saying. But I like this idea that you're sharing around um, the non-traditional scope that background has allowed you to look at these things a little bit differently. This is a concept that I would say comes up a lot on the podcast, that when we think about our roles in HR specifically, there's all of this thought leadership out there about how we should approach culture, what we should do to advance or improve employee engagement. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to follow that or look through that lens or follow that prescription. That you can actually, and you should, challenge the status quo, which is
Yeah.
really what comes down to this, or boils down this idea of having
Uh,
a non-traditional background in some of these things. So that's really,
right.
I think it's really
Right.
important.
Yeah, because I talk about HR issues all the time, and I talk about building culture, hiring, firing, interviewing, and to almost a T, the comments I get is, we never heard it that way. We never heard it served up that
Mm-hmm.
way. And I think part of that is, you know, when I was an intern, I had a resident that I had to to answer to, and so how did I approach that? And so you just reverse engineer all your own experiences, and you realize, how do you really grow and become a success, and then you reverse engineer it into your own organization.
Absolutely. This idea of reverse engineering is actually really important. When we think about, someone who is in an HR position, let's say, there are all of these opportunities to take problems and solve them. And whether it's, and I'm sure you can relate to this too, given your board certifications, because it's all about problem solving, especially just as a
Mm-hmm.
doctor in general. And so for HR leaders, they're taking these problems and they have to solve them. But so often there's this opportunity to reverse engineer or retro plan, to say, okay, well, what solution are we going for? What's our goal? So in this case, if our goal is to create a thriving, productive culture for employees, what does that look like? What does that look like
Right.
for the company? And then how do we get there based on where we are today, which is potentially the problem that we're solving for? It's easier to say, it's easier to talk about on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But that, I think it's a really important distinction to make. And so I'd love to know from you, what are some strategies that you would recommend to reverse engineer solutions that come down, that are focused on this concept of creating a positive and productive, thriving culture?
Well, I think when you look at that, building a culture, it's broken up into two parts. One is the hiring process and how you approach that. And then once you address that, then, how do you build culture after, you've hired? So I don't know which way you want to go first, but those are really two really important yet separate way to attack the issue.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I guess from there, when we think about even this concept of empowering people through building the culture, obviously it goes without saying that in order to build these cultures, we have to rely on people to do that. So from what you've seen and in your experience, how do you leverage those people?
Well, so to build culture, the one thing you have to do is you have to develop an organization that the culture you want is already adopted by the majority of the people in the culture, because it doesn't really matter who you hire or bring in. If the vast majority of people have a certain approach, even if you hire an outlier that is all bought in and has a what we call an owner's mentality, they will be outnumbered by the people who are, let's say, more clocking in and clocking out. The example I always give is, if you and I got a job at the post office tomorrow, which, not to put down the post office, but it's a pretty much, kind of, let's get the work done, but we're not here to revolutionize the postal service. Mm-hmm. And so if you and I got a job there and on week one said, hey, I have some great ideas on how to really change things up, and I think it would be met with a lot of like, look, this is the way it's done, just sit back, whatever. And so, because they would outnumber anybody who wanted to take initiative, potentially. And I hope I don't get any bad comments from people in the postal service, but if you go into another place where the majority of people are bought in, and then you go in and you want to clock in and out, you're going to feel that culture, kind of splashing you in the face. So I think the first thing anyone has to look at in an organization is who outnumbers who. If in your organization the people who are bought in outnumber anyone that might come in, you're going to have a big advantage, because most people want to conform, and if they come into an organization that's already like that, then it's going to make your job a lot easier. If it's not, you could hire some dynamic person and put him into an organization where everyone else is clocking in and clocking out, and they will eventually, go down to that level potentially.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So you have to understand that when you first set up your organization, you have to really work hard to get buy-in out of the original people you bring in, and you have them for sure outnumber anyone else who might want to be coasting. Now, that assumes your organization requires people to be bought in. If I'm hiring the 1,000th nurse for a hospital, I'm not sure I need that nurse to revolutionize my hospital. If I'm hiring the 1,000th worker at a Macy's, I'm not sure I need that person to change Macy's stock price. Mm-hmm. But if you're doing a startup and you have 10, 15, 20 people, yes, every one of those people is going to potentially count, and there are no filler positions in that, as I call them. So it depends where you are in your organization, whether you actually need people to be bought in, or you actually, if you have a factory and you need some people to work on the assembly line, again, that's just an analogy. You don't need them to, be 1,000% bought in. But there are certain positions, certain organizations, depending on where you are, where you need that buy-in, right? Because the amount of, someone may work 40 hours a week, but what they give you in that 40 hours there can be a wide range. And you may not need that top, all-in thing, or you may, depending on the position, depending on your organization. So there's no generic answer. It really depends on where you are in your HR needs, where your organization is. if you're hiring your 99th accountant in an accounting department, you don't need to hire a guy that's going to revolutionize the accounting department. If you're hiring your first accountant in your accounting department, that guy or that girl has to be spot on. And so those things matter. I don't know. Yeah.
I think that this is a very interesting discussion point and concept, because one, it helps us to understand that there is no one size fits all to how businesses are run, and that there are differences between needs for people in these industries, depending on the industry, I should say. And it's an interesting concept that when you think about, a type of business that really requires this high level of engagement versus businesses that maybe don't necessarily require that and really just require employees who are focused on just kind of coming in, doing the job and leaving. And there are people who only want that. There are a lot of articles that have come out recently around how people are, quote unquote, less connected to the mission of their companies. And I don't immediately, when I read headlines like that, I don't immediately have a negative reaction or response. I think, well, that's okay. Not every single person can be the most engaged person in a company. And I think, as I think about some of the episodes that I've done throughout 2023, this episode is coming out in 2024, culture spans, the discussions around culture touch like every corner of the earth. There are opinions on driving culture, to that everyone needs to be engaged. And then there are opinions that not everyone needs to be engaged. And all of it is okay. I don't think there's a right or a wrong. But this concept that you've shared around, one, I want to definitely come back to this owners versus renters mentality, which we'll come back to. But two, that there are certain businesses and there are certain companies that have to really drive home the emphasis of having 100% buy-in. Now, my thought here, and maybe it's really more of a question, is what happens if a company requires, tons and tons of buy-in from their employees,
Right.
and
Right.
the employees that are there contribute to a toxic work culture. In your opinion, is that something that then there has to be this kind of like complete turnover in order to have the culture that the business leaders want? Or is this something where people can be considered like change agents? Like, if the majority are contributing to a toxic work culture, can they change?
Look, anything can happen. So anyone can change and anything can happen. But practically speaking, the answer is no, in the sense that, if you were playing a basketball game and at halftime I came in the locker room as the referee and said, listen, I know it's halftime, the score is this and that, but we're changing the rules. From now on, 3-pointers are 4 points and layups are 6 points. And you're like, whoa, we're in the middle of the game. What are you talking about? We're not changing the rules. And I think when you go to someone and say, listen, I know we hired you. We were okay with you clocking in and out. We were okay if you were 10, 15 minutes late. We're okay if you only did the bare minimum to keep your boss off your back. But now we're asking for more. You're like, whoa. So you're changing the rule. Now, can that work? Maybe. Could work. I wouldn't bet on it. I mean, and can you switch one person? But it's hard because you are changing the rules in the middle of the game. What people want is their expectations to be managed. So when you interview someone and say, listen, I got to tell you, we're a startup. There's only 5 of us. We don't have any positions where you can mesh into the wallpaper. And, we're not going to ask you to work more than 40 hours a week. But those 40 hours, we need you. We need you focused. And not only do we need you to be great, we need you to make other people great, right? Because unless we can clone more of you, you got to help us make everyone else great. Now, if that's what you need. Now, again, like if you needed somebody for an assembly line, I wouldn't have that conversation. But here's what I would say. I mean, look at it this way. If you and I were doing a startup in Silicon Valley tomorrow morning, okay, and it's 5 of us in a garage, we could have the best idea in the world. You and I could be inventing Uber for the first time. Let's go back in a time machine. We're going to create Uber in a garage, come up with the app. But I promise you, if there's those first 5 people in Uber are not fully dialed in, that it may not work. So it doesn't matter how good your idea is, potentially. Right? So there, the likelihood of any business taking off is probably some level linked to the commitment of especially the core group, the core leaders, the core founders, the core. So, and even in a big organization, a moderate size organization, there's a core group of leaders. And if those people are clocking in and clocking out, and the first time somebody offers them $2 more an hour, they're gone, you're not going to be able to bank on the future, right? And so it depends where you are and what you need. But now, again, if you're hiring your 100th IT guy in your company, I don't think you need to have that conversation, right? I think you just say, listen, we need an IT guy. We need you to do a good job. We need you to come, show up, blah, blah, blah. We're going to pay you well. These are your benefits. Do you have the skills to do this? And that's the conversation. But you have to understand what it is you need and where your organization is. And it's very difficult once you've established that it's okay to come in, clock in and out. Then, how are you going to present this that all of a sudden you want more? I mean, unless you also say, but we're doubling your salary or whatever.
Right.
I think people appreciate honesty and upfront. So if you say, look, this is where our organization is right now, and this is what we need. If you're up for that, I think your upside is endless. There's no the sky's the limit to how much will compensate you, and the sky's the limit to how you can grow professionally. However, we're going to need that buy-in from day one. And so they can decide. They can say, you know what, I'm going to stay. And by the way, one comment that I always make to people who we need that from is, I say, I need you to be honest, because I need to make sure I caught you in a stage in your life where that's okay with you. And I tell them, listen, honestly, there have been stages in my life where I needed a job. There's nothing wrong with that. And there, you caught me at a certain age, and depending on what was going on in my life, my personal life, and I'm not ready to give you that. I got things going on. I have a little Amazon business out of my garage, and I'm working on that, and we might be moving in 6 months. My wife or husband's going to get a job in Tennessee, so I just need a job in the meantime. So it's not just a matter of just telling them. They say you have to catch them in the right time of their life where they want to do that. And the one thing I just want to add, you can't ask people for that unless you're prepared to deliver too. So it's not a one-way street where you say, come on, give me everything you got. You also have to have this opportunity for them to say, listen, if you come in and you blow this place up, literally the sky is the limit to what you can make professionally and financially. And you got to be honest. That's got to be true. So it's a two-way street. So if you're going to ask for the world, you better be prepared. If they execute and if the company grows and they're part of the reason the company is growing, maybe they're whatever. They don't have to directly bring the growth in, but if they're part of the reason, then you need to take care of them. So it's this quid pro quo if you're going to ask for that. So I don't know if that helps.
It helps a ton. I think it's a really, really good point, actually. And I am feeling very inspired by this notion of how we as business leaders can really assert this idea that, if we're asking for the world, we have to be able to deliver essentially the world back if we get that world, right? Like that's essentially the concept. And I want to come back to this idea that you had shared fairly briefly around the owners versus renters mentality.
Yes.
Walk us through that concept.
Oh, that's so important. So, by the way, that owner-renter thing does really describe it. I always tell people, imagine you're renting a house, right? And you walking in the front door, and there's a plant next to the front door that looks like it's struggling a little bit. If I'm renting, I don't even notice that, right? I own that house, and I walk in and I say, "Hey, honey, look at that plant. And, is it getting enough water? I mean, can we call the gardener and let me go check that?" And I think it's that mentality. And by the way, a lot of people say, "Teach me how to be an owner." Like I have had staff tell me, "Teach me how to." I'm like, no. I don't need to teach you, because when you buy a house, did anyone say, "Now that you're an owner of a house, let me teach you to notice that"? Let me teach you to notice the scrape on the wall. No, you're gonna. Or when you buy your car, right? Versus renting a car from Avis. When you buy a brand new car, hey, who told you to park this brand new car in the corner of the parking lot so nobody puts a dent into it? Because you just bought it. Did someone give you a manual? When you buy a new car, please go park it in the corner 1,000 feet away from another car, so no one. No, you instinctually know when you own something how to take care of it, right? Oh, teach me how to be an owner in this company. No.
It's a values
teach
concept.
You how to be? Yeah, when you buy a house, do you not obviously take care of it differently than when you were renting, right? I mean, all of a sudden, honey, we should really replace the faucets. They look so outdated. Do you say that when you're renting, or do you ever say, oh, the sliding doors looks a little wiggly? You don't even notice it. Or if you're at a hotel or whatever, but you clearly notice it the minute you own it. So really, it's a switch that goes in the brain when someone in an organization feels like, you know what, this is my organization. And the last way I serve it up is, again, if you need it and you got to be able to take care of them, is I will tell someone, let me ask you a question. The product you're currently putting out. Okay. I just want to can you be honest with me? If I sold you the company right now for $1, here's a piece of paper, just sign here. You own the company. Would you show up tomorrow and give me a different product? Well, yeah, if you sold me the company, of course I'd come in and give you a different product. I'm not saying work any more hours, but would things be different? And I'm like, well, basically what we're asking for is for you to do that even though you don't own the company.
Right.
But in exchange, now this is the key, okay? So you can't just say, gimme. But in exchange, we're going to take care of you, and professionally and financially. And so that is the exchange. If someone says to you, no, if you sold me the company tomorrow for $1, I'd give you a different product. Well, then you got to ask why.
It's fascinating. It's actually a very great way to visualize not only buy-in, but also how to drive. It's not just engagement, but how to drive that commitment, I guess it is. The commitment within, an organization. And there are always going to be renters. There are always going to be owners. But this idea of that you've also expanded on around, well, if I sold you the company tomorrow, would you be selling me a different product? It's a really great way to visualize how an employee can actually greatly impact an environment, how they can greatly impact the return on investment that they're expected to make in terms of their role, whatever that might be. In HR, it's, making the employee experience better. And that's everything from payroll and benefits to actual, culture development. But it's great to have the visual around that. And I don't think there's a ton of discussion around how that can actually look and feel. It's really interesting.
I think you have to serve it up, but I think there's a grain of honesty and clarity, because the worst thing you can do is not disclose what you're expecting, and then pray that you get it.
Right. The transparency is exceedingly important. To your point, when someone is being hired, you had mentioned this earlier, in a startup world, for example, if you're not painting this picture of what that really looks like, someone's going to join that company and be totally shell-shocked by a reality that was not shared with them.
Yeah, especially if their last 5 jobs were clocking in and clocking out. And what's interesting is if their last 5 jobs were clocking in and clocking out, and then they come in and clock in and out, and then you're not happy, they're like, whoa, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with your company?
Mm-hmm.
The last 5
Mm-hmm.
companies were okay with me clocking. No, they won't say it like that. The last 5 companies didn't say anything about that, and they were okay with me. And so
Right.
you then become the outlier. Like, oh wow, when I had a job at Target, they weren't trying to get me to change Target stock price, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
but you're asking me, you want me to change your stock price, metaphorically,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Sure.
Right. But Target, they as long as I was nice to people and I rang up the sales and I, and I was nice to everybody and I went home and everything was good. And now you're telling me that's not good enough? Like, what's
Right.
wrong with your company? And
Right.
so you can't just expect them to think your job is different than the last if they had. Now sometimes they come from an organization that was already asked of them, but often
Yeah.
that's not the case.
You're right. You're right. Well, Dr. Baktari, you have given us so much insightful takeaways, so many insightful takeaways here, and we have a lot to think about. I think the listeners hopefully feel inspired by some new ideas and concepts and ways to really visualize how they can influence and continue to impact their companies and their environments. So that being said, please let the listeners know where they can connect with you, listen to your podcast, and learn more about what you do.
Yeah, we cover similar topics, especially season 2 on my podcast, BaktariMD. So you just would go to BaktariMD on YouTube or any of the podcast app. And also we have a website, BaktariMD.com. Of course, you can also find me on LinkedIn. But I would say our podcast, if they like these kind of some HR issues and similar issues, to go ahead to even YouTube and see the video version of our podcast.
Wonderful. And all of those links will be shared in the show notes as well. Dr. Baktari, thank you so much for being here again and really appreciate your time.
Tracy, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Sure. Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.